They deserve it more. My mother-in-law, Margaret, sneered, standing in my children's now empty bedrooms. Ashley's kids are used to the finer things in life. Your children can sleep in the basement for now. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the bare walls where my kids' artwork had hung just hours ago. All their belongings, photos, toys, books had been carelessly tossed into boxes and dumped in the basement. In their place were designer suitcases and expensive electronics belonging to my husband's wealthy cousin Ashley's children. My name is Emma Carter, and at 35, I never imagined I'd be fighting for my own children's space in what was supposed to be our home. My husband, James, was away on a 2-month business trip, and his parents had taken it upon themselves to reorganize our living arrangements without consulting either of us. Where are Tommy and Sarah supposed to sleep? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. My 8-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter had spent the weekend at their friend's house, completely unaware that they were about to lose their rooms. The basement is perfectly fine. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. We've put some old mattresses down there. Besides, Ashley's children need a proper environment to maintain their standard of living. You understand, don't you? No, I didn't understand. Ashley, James's cousin, had apparently fallen out with her husband and needed a place to stay with her 3 kids. Instead of offering their own sprawling 5-bedroom house, my in-laws had decided to commandeer my children's rooms in our modest 3-bedroom home. This is our house, I said firmly. You can't just make these decisions without. Actually, dear, my father-in-law, George, interrupted, emerging from Tommy's room with a smug smile. This house belongs to us. Or have you forgotten who helped with the down payment? Of course. They never let me forget that they contributed to the down payment 5 years ago when James and I bought the house. It was a loan we'd been steadily repaying, but in their minds, it gave them eternal authority over our living space. Where are my children's things? I asked, heading toward the basement. Careful with those boxes, Margaret called after me. We had to move quickly to make room for Ashley's Pottery Barn furniture. Some things might have gotten mixed up. The basement looked like a war zone. Boxes were strewn everywhere, their contents spilling out haphazardly. I found Sarah's favorite stuffed elephant, a gift from her grandmother, my mother, before she passed away, crushed under a heavy box of books. Tommy's carefully assembled Lego creations lay in pieces. My hands shook as I picked up the broken pieces of my children's lives. The basement was cold, damp, and dark, barely suitable for storage, let alone for 2 growing children to live in. Emma? I heard Ashley's voice from upstairs. The kids and I really appreciate this. I know it's a bit sudden, but Mother Margaret assured us it wouldn't be a problem. I climbed back upstairs to find Ashley, perfectly manicured and dressed in designer clothes, directing movers to bring in more furniture. Her 3 children stood nearby, tapping on their iPads, completely oblivious to the chaos they caused. How long are you planning to stay? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. Oh, just until the divorce settlement is finalized, Ashley replied airily. 3 months, maybe 4. Mother Margaret suggested we could make this a permanent arrangement if things work out. The schools in this district are quite good, though not quite up to the standards my children are used to. 3 months? Permanent arrangement? My head spun as I watched them continue to transform my children's rooms. Margaret and George bustled around, fawning over Ashley's kids while my children's possessions lay scattered in the basement. I retreated to my bedroom and called James. It went straight to voicemail. He was probably in meetings. I sent him a text explaining the situation, but I knew from experience that his response would be tepid at best. Try to make it work, he'd say. You know how Mom and Dad are. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah's best friend's mom. The girls are having so much fun. Should I drop Sarah home after dinner? I stared at the message, my heart breaking. How could I explain to my children that they'd been evicted from their rooms? That their grandmother valued their cousin's comfort over theirs? Emma, Margaret's voice carried up the stairs. Be a dear and help us move these boxes to the garage. Ashley's interior decorator is coming tomorrow, and we need to clear some space. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down at my computer and opened my email. 6 months ago, I'd started my own small business as a virtual assistant, something Margaret constantly belittled as a little hobby. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly successful, building a substantial client base and savings. I opened my banking app and looked at the balance, the result of countless late nights and weekend work. Then I pulled up a folder labeled Plan B and started making calls, first to my lawyer, then to a real estate agent I'd been quietly consulting with. What my in-laws didn't know was that I'd been preparing for something like this. Years of their subtle digs, their constant undermining, their blatant favoritism. It had taught me to always have a backup plan. They thought they had all the power because of that down payment, but they were about to learn how wrong they were. "Emma," Margaret called again. "These boxes won't move themselves." I smiled, a calm settling over me as I finalized the arrangements. "Coming." I called back, closing my laptop. Let them think they'd won. In 2 weeks, they'd learn exactly what happened when you messed with my children's happiness. Tommy and Sarah would be home soon, and for tonight, we'd make do with the basement. But I had set something in motion that would wipe the smug smiles off my in-laws' faces forever. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. It's carefully planned and perfectly executed. And I had been planning this for a very long time. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in patience. I watched silently as Ashley and her children took over our home, as Margaret and George continued their campaign of subtle humiliation, and as my own children tried to adjust to life in the basement. "Mom, why do we have to sleep down here?" Tommy asked one night, his voice small in the darkness. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I assured him, tucking him into the makeshift bed. "Sometimes people make unfair decisions, but it won't be forever. I promise." Sarah had grown quieter, spending more time at friends' houses. She was old enough to understand the unfairness of it all. To see how her grandmother doted on Ashley's children while treating her like an afterthought. It broke my heart, but I kept reminding myself that everything was almost ready. My lawyer, Diana Wilson, had been working overtime to prepare the documents. "Everything's in order," she confirmed during our latest meeting. "The original loan agreement your in-laws signed specifically stated their contribution was a loan, not an investment. You've more than repaid it, with interest. They have no legal claim to the property." But that wasn't all. Diana smiled as she pulled out another set of papers. "The inspection on the new house is complete. We can close whenever you're ready." I've been searching for a new home for months, long before this incident. Something about Margaret and George's increasing interference had warned me to be prepared. The house I found was perfect. A beautiful 4-bedroom colonial just outside the city with a huge backyard for the kids and, most importantly, far from my in-laws' reach. Ashley continued to redecorate my children's rooms, spending obscene amounts of money on furniture and decor. Margaret came by daily, bringing special treats for Ashley's kids while barely acknowledging Tommy and Sarah. George made grand announcements about how this arrangement would benefit everyone. I documented everything, every dismissive comment, every instance of favoritism, every time they made my children feel unwelcome in their own home. James finally called after receiving my messages. "Honey, you're overreacting," he said, his voice distant. "Mom and Dad are just trying to help Ashley through a difficult time." "By throwing your own children into the basement?" I asked quietly. "It's temporary," he insisted. "Just try to make it work until I get back." I hung up without responding. James had always chosen the path of least resistance when it came to his parents. Well, this time he'd have to deal with the consequences of that choice. The pieces of my plan were falling into place. Diana had filed all the necessary paperwork. The movers were scheduled. The new house was ready. I even enrolled Tommy and Sarah in their new school, which had a much better academic program than their current one. "Mrs. Carter," Margaret cornered me in the kitchen one morning. "Ashley's decorator thinks the basement would make a lovely playroom for the children. Could you clear out your things by the weekend?" I smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle her. "Of course, Margaret. I'll take care of everything this week." She looked suspicious at my easy agreement but didn't press further. That evening, I started packing, but not in the way they expected. While everyone slept, I quietly boxed up our important possessions, family photos, documents, treasured memories. The moving company would handle the furniture later. 3 days before my plan was set to unfold, George made an announcement at dinner. "We've been thinking," he said pompously, "since this arrangement is working so well, we should make it official. Ashley's lease on her old place is up next month, and this would be perfect for everyone." "Perfect," Margaret echoed, beaming at Ashley's children while my own sat silently at the far end of the table. We can convert the basement into a proper living space for Tommy and Sarah. I watched them make plans for my home, discussing renovations and arrangements as if they owned the place. As if my children's feelings didn't matter. As if I had no say in any of it. That night, as I helped Sarah with her homework in our cramped basement corner, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, are we going to live down here forever?" I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "No, baby. In fact, I have a surprise for you and Tommy. But you have to keep it a secret for just a few more days. Can you do that?" She nodded, a spark of curiosity replacing the sadness in her eyes. I showed her and Tommy pictures of the new house on my phone. Watching their faces light up as they saw their potential new rooms, the backyard with its tire swing, and the tree house that the previous owners had built. "Is this real?" Tommy whispered, his eyes wide. "Very real, I promised. And no one can take it away from us." The next day, I made a show of agreeing to all of Margaret and George's plans. "You're right," I said, watching their surprised expressions. "This would be perfect for everyone. Why don't we have a family dinner this Friday to celebrate my treat?" Margaret was suspicious of my sudden cooperation, but she couldn't resist the opportunity to celebrate her perfect plan. "Wonderful idea. I'll invite the whole family." As I watched them plan their victory dinner, I thought about the certified letters that would be arriving the next day, the movers scheduled for Saturday morning, and the look that would be on their faces when they realized what I'd done. They thought they had all the power. They thought they could push us around forever. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Friday evening arrived with perfect timing. Margaret had outdone herself decorating for the celebration dinner, inviting every family member who would witness their triumph. The dining room table was set with her best china, and Ashley's children were dressed in designer outfits for the occasion. My children and I arrived last, and I couldn't help but smile at the sight of certified letters sitting unopened on the side table. They'd been too busy preparing for their victory party to check the mail. "Emma," Margaret called out, "be a dear, and fetch the wine from the basement." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "But first, shouldn't we open those letters? They look important." George waved dismissively. "They can wait until after dinner." "Actually," I said, picking up the letters, "I think you'll want to read these now." I handed them their copies, keeping my voice steady. "They're from my lawyer." The room fell silent. Margaret's hand shook slightly as she tore open the envelope. I watched their faces as they read, watched the color drain from their cheeks as understanding dawned. "What is this?" George demanded, his voice rising. "You're serving us with repayment confirmation and a notice of property rights?" "That's right," I said calmly. "The loan you provided for our down payment has been repaid in full, with interest. As clearly documented, it was always a loan, not an investment. You have no claim to this house or any say in what happens here." "This is ridiculous," Margaret sputtered. "We're family. You can't." "Can't what?" I interrupted. "Can't protect my children. Can't stand up to your bullying. Watch me." Ashley stood up, her perfect composure cracking. "Mother Margaret, what does this mean?" "It means," I continued, "that your perfect plan has fallen apart. You see, this house is fully mine, and I'm selling it." The chaos that erupted was almost comical. Margaret started crying, George turned purple with rage, and Ashley's children actually looked up from their phones for once. "You can't sell the house." George roared. "Where will Ashley and the children go?" "That's not my problem," I replied. "But you have such a big house. Surely you can accommodate them there." Margaret's tears dried instantly. "Now let's not be hasty." "The house has already been sold," I announced. "We close next week. I suggest you start packing." "Does James know about this?" George demanded, reaching for his phone. "I sent him all the documentation this morning. He's probably reading it right now." As if on cue, George's phone rang, James's name flashing on the screen. He answered it on speaker, probably expecting support. "Dad," James's voice was tight. "What the hell have you and Mom been doing to my family?" "James, your wife has lost her mind. She's selling the house." "Yes, she told me everything. How you threw my children into the basement, how you've been treating them. I've seen the videos she sent, the documented evidence of your behavior. I'm ashamed I didn't stop this sooner." Margaret tried to interject, but James continued, "I'm coming home early, and when I get back, we're going to have a long conversation about boundaries." After he hung up, I turned to my shell-shocked audience. The movers are coming tomorrow. Tommy, Sarah, and I will be moving to our new home. You have until next Friday to find alternative arrangements for Ashley and her children. But where are you going? Margaret asked weakly. That's not your concern anymore. You've lost the right to know anything about our lives. I took my children's hands and led them upstairs to their rooms where boxes were already packed and ready. We spent the last week secretly preparing, and now everything was in place. Mom, Sarah whispered as we walked out, did you see Grandma's face? Priceless, wasn't it? I smiled, hugging her close. The next morning, the movers arrived bright and early. We watched as Margaret, George, and Ashley frantically tried to figure out their next move. Their perfect plan had crumbled, and now they were the ones scrambling for arrangements. As we pulled out of the driveway for the last time, Tommy asked, will we ever see them again? That's up to them, I replied honestly. If they can learn to respect us and treat you both with the love you deserve, maybe. But for now, we're going to focus on our new beginning. Our new house was everything we'd hoped for. Tommy and Sarah spent the first day exploring every corner, planning how to decorate their new rooms that no one could take away from them. That evening, as we sat in our new living room eating pizza straight from the box, Sarah looked at me with a bright smile. Mom, you're kind of badass. I laughed, pulling both my children close. Sometimes you have to be, especially when it comes to protecting the people you love. James called later that night, his voice full of remorse. I should have stood up to them years ago, he said. I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm proud of you for doing what I couldn't. Just come home, I told him. We have a fresh start waiting for you. As I got ready for bed that night, I checked my phone one last time. There were dozens of missed calls from Margaret and George, several tearful voicemails from Ashley, and one text from Margaret that simply read, how could you do this to family? I smiled as I typed my response. Family protects each other. You should try it sometime. Then I turned off my phone, closed my bedroom door, and left them to deal with the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free.